The moment Tom Bauer dropped his book, something inside Meghan Markle's carefully protected world didn't explode, it froze. And in Hollywood, silence is never peace. Silence is panic. Silence is calculation. Silence is the sound of someone realizing the battlefield has shifted and the rules no longer belong to them. Because Meghan Markle was never supposed to be cornered. She was the one who cornered others. The one who sued newspapers. The one who dragged photographers into court. The one who made entire media organizations rethink their words before printing her name. She had built a reputation not just as a duchess, not just as a global icon, but as someone who fought back and won. But this time, something was different.
Which is very revelatory, as you know, about Meghan and Harry. I got absolutely no help from the palace whatsoever, on the contrary. I think it's mixed. I think that once she saw Meghan when she came to London in 2016, 2018, and she reached out to Victoria to get freebies. And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut.
Meghan left Britain and then did the Oprah Winfrey interview. It's been really poisonous.
Well, he does it because he needs a profile. That's the only way they can get money, by showing the profile. And for Netflix, everything is built around the future documentary series to promote the Sussex.
Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
Right.
The Netflix series is over. There's no great podcast. They don't generate any money. And I don't see where she is going from here. I think she has a major problem.
Why Meghan?
Well, because she poses a challenge to the royal family, and she's a fascinating person. I mean, she's a person who started from nothing and has become a world global star. And that route to the top has never really been properly reported and examined and investigated. In the trailer, there had 27,000 comments. 95% of them were negative. So they already knew there was a problem of the image. There was also the Vanity Fair article, which is, American Hustle was a huge blow.
We love it. We love to see it.
To Meghan. So it was opportune. And of course, by then she also knew that her brand was in great trouble. Meghan had already recorded their poison for Netflix. It was already edited. All the stuff that we heard today about Charles lying, about William screaming and shouting, was in the can, was being edited.
Tom Bauer, where he doesn't go there. He doesn't go there. But he does go there as far as the fact that they wanted to keep the birth private and all the secrecy around that, and even the fact that
the Oprah interview was the nuclear moment. It wasn't just an interview, it was a detonation heard across continents. The royal institution cracked open on primetime television, and Meghan wasn't hiding anymore. She was controlling the narrative. Every tear, every pause, every accusation, it all landed exactly where it was meant to land. And for a while, it worked. The public leaned closer. The cameras leaned in. Sympathy poured in like a flood. But sympathy is temporary, and Tom Bauer was patient. He didn't scream, he didn't accuse wildly, he did something far more dangerous. He watched, he listened, he collected, and when his book Revenge surfaced, the expectation was immediate chaos. Legal war, emergency injunctions, furious statements. Meghan had sued over far less. So surely this deeply personal dissection of her rise, her relationships, her decisions would trigger a legal earthquake. But it didn't. There were whispers of legal action, murmurs behind closed doors, quiet warnings passed through media channels, but the courtroom doors stayed shut. No filings, no dramatic legal showdown, just silence. And that silence made insiders uncomfortable. Because in Meghan's world, silence wasn't normal. Silence wasn't her weapon. Lawsuits were. And suddenly, the woman who had always fought publicly was holding back privately.
The accusation of Oprah Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, which we must now look forward in a year's time or so.
So 2025 was the beginning of something very, very exciting for her. Because not least, With Love, Meghan was going to appear a few weeks into the new year. And then, of course, it all goes wrong. But on that day, New Year's Day, she could only hope, well, it's a new year, it can only get better.
Meghan made that accusation of Oprah Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, which we must now look forward in a year's time or something.
Exactly.
But
This
I do
whole
think it's
thing
very
will happen.
interesting.
What made this situation dangerous wasn't a single accusation. It was the pattern. Patterns that Bauer allegedly built piece by piece, voice by voice, timeline by timeline. Former staff, former insiders, former allies, people who once orbited close enough to feel her gravitational pull and later found themselves drifting into cold distance. Individually, their stories could be dismissed, but together they formed something heavier, something harder to shake off, because repetition creates credibility, and credibility creates risk. Behind palace gates and Hollywood doors, people began asking quiet questions. Why didn't she sue him? Why didn't she crush this narrative the same way she had crushed others? What was different this time? The truth was uncomfortable because defamation cases don't operate on emotion. They operate on evidence. And evidence doesn't just expose one side. It exposes everyone. A lawsuit wouldn't just put Tom Bauer under a microscope. It would put Meghan under oath. And oath is where narratives lose their polish, where every email becomes evidence. Every text becomes context. Every private moment becomes public property. And suddenly, the battlefield no longer belonged to image, it belongs to documentation.
I think what happened was they asked him to put a figure on it, and they thought, let's include that too. This is all conjecture, this is all fantasy, but it's selling his book and selling an attack on the royal family. And of course, he is perfectly safe in Britain. The protection argument has always been used by him to make himself important.
He had a purpose when he lived in London and was a member of the royal family. But there he is on the west coast. He can go paddling, he can sit in his garden and smoke. But what else has he got to do? And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut to crack. And I think Harry, whereas he's come over, he didn't stay after the funeral, he didn't stay after the coronation.
That's when the deeper fear started creeping into the conversation. Not fear of losing, but fear of exposure. Because court isn't just about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. And proving yourself right means opening doors you've kept locked for years. Former staff could be called to testify. Former friends could be forced to speak. Industry insiders who once stayed silent could suddenly find themselves legally obligated to explain what they saw, what they heard, what they experienced. Secrets don't survive subpoenas. And even winning wouldn't guarantee safety, because trials don't erase embarrassment. They archive it. Every answer becomes a transcript. Every hesitation becomes permanent. And permanence is dangerous in a world built on reinvention. Behind the scenes, advisors allegedly understood the stakes. Filing a lawsuit might win a headline, but it could lose control. And control was Meghan's most powerful currency, because Meghan wasn't just famous. She was strategic. She understood timing, optics, perception. She understood that sometimes the most powerful move isn't to attack, it's to wait. And Tom Bauer kept talking, calmly, methodically, without urgency, without fear. That confidence made people nervous, because confidence usually comes from preparation, and preparation usually means protection. Protection built from documents, timelines, conversations, details that don't fade with time. Every interview he gave, every calm explanation, every repeated claim, it didn't feel emotional. It felt deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how much he could say and exactly how much he was holding back. That was the real tension, not what was written, but what wasn't. Because rumors started spreading that there was more interviews, more material, more voices that never made it into print. Material reportedly withheld, not because it was weak, but because it was too strong to release without necessity. And necessity arrives in court. Court forces disclosure. Court removes control. Court turns private narratives into public evidence. And suddenly, the woman who had mastered public storytelling was facing something she couldn't script. Procedure. Procedure doesn't care about titles. Procedure doesn't care about sympathy. Procedure cares about facts, and facts don't bend. Behind palace walls and Hollywood gates, something subtle began to shift. Media outlets that once tiptoed cautiously around Meghan's name started speaking more openly. The fear of legal retaliation, once immediate and suffocating, began to fade, because fear requires follow-through, and follow-through never came. Editors noticed it. commentators noticed it. The public noticed it. The threats existed, but the lawsuits didn't. And absence creates its own narrative. A narrative of hesitation. A narrative of calculation. A narrative that whispered one dangerous question louder and louder. What was she protecting? Because if Tom Bauer was wrong, court was the perfect place to prove it. But court was also the perfect place to expose everything else. And that risk was bigger than revenge. What made this situation even more explosive wasn't just what Tom Bauer published, it was what the legal system could force into daylight if Meghan Markle ever decided to strike back. Because once a lawsuit begins, control doesn't belong to reputation anymore. It belongs to procedure. And procedure has no loyalty. Documentation. That's the word that sends chills through anyone whose empire depends on perception. Because documentation doesn't forget. Emails don't forget. Messages don't forget. Contracts don't forget. And once discovery begins, every carefully managed narrative gets peeled open layer by layer, timestamp by timestamp. Imagine that moment. Private conversations suddenly transformed into courtroom exhibits. Text messages dissected by lawyers. Internal PR strategies read aloud in cold, emotionless voices. Communications that were never meant for public ears suddenly becoming public record. Because discovery doesn't care about privacy. It cares about verification. And verification is merciless. This wasn't about proving feelings, it was about proving facts. Tom Bauer never framed his claims like explosive accusations of crimes. He framed them as patterns, strategic decisions, calculated moves, behavior supported allegedly by multiple voices across different timelines. And that framing made everything harder to attack because you can argue against an accusation, but arguing against a pattern requires dismantling every voice behind it, every timeline, every document, every memory. That's when the power balance shifts because the courtroom doesn't ask who was more famous, it asks who was more verifiable. And that question terrifies anyone whose life has been built under constant image management. Truth inside a courtroom isn't decided by sympathy, it's decided by consistency. And consistency creates something Meghan couldn't easily fight: corroboration. Because if multiple people, separated by time, location, and loyalty, tell similar stories, the courtroom doesn't see coincidence, it sees credibility. And credibility is heavier than influence. That's why the response didn't come as a lawsuit. Instead, it came as distance, statements questioning tone, suggestions of bias, allies speaking out indirectly, but never the one move that would force everything into open confrontation. Because confrontation eliminates control, and control was everything. Meanwhile, Tom Bauer stayed calm in interviews, calm in discussions, calm in the face of a global figure with far more fame, far more power, far more visibility. That calmness didn't feel accidental. It felt like certainty, because certainty usually comes from preparation, and preparation usually comes from evidence. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered about what a courtroom clash would really mean. Not headlines, not gossip, exposure. Exposure of timelines, exposure of relationships, exposure of private strategies that had shaped Meghan's rise from Hollywood actress to global royal figure. And exposure doesn't just affect the present, it rewrites the past. Suddenly, every decision gets re-examined, every alliance gets questioned, every departure gets scrutinized. The Oprah interview, once seen as Meghan's ultimate moment of control, would become part of the evidence chain. Every word analyzed, every claim measured against timelines and communications. Because court doesn't accept narratives, it accepts proof. Proof turns stories into evidence, and evidence doesn't negotiate. This is where the tension reached its peak, because Meghan had built her power on controlling perception, controlling when she spoke, controlling how she spoke, controlling what the world saw. But court removes that power. Court forces answers. Court forces clarity. Court forces truth under oath. And oath changes everything. Because under oath, silence isn't protection. Silence becomes suspicion. And answers become permanent. Permanent in transcripts. Permanent in legal records. Permanent in history. Tom Bauer's strength wasn't just what he revealed. It was how he structured it. Not chaos. Not emotional attacks. Structure. Patterns. Consistency. Voices layered in a way designed to survive scrutiny. That design wasn't accidental, it was defensive, because investigative writers who expect legal retaliation prepare differently. They verify, they cross-check, they protect themselves with documentation and corroboration. And that preparation creates confidence. Confidence creates calm, and calm creates fear in the opposition, because calm signals readiness. Meanwhile, Meghan's silence grew louder, not weakness, containment, because silence preserves flexibility, silence preserves options, silence prevents doors from being forced open before you're ready. But silence also feeds speculation, and speculation feeds public curiosity. Because the public understands one universal truth, people fight hardest when they know they can win. And hesitation suggests uncertainty, not emotional uncertainty, legal uncertainty. Because legal battles don't just test the accuser, they test the accused. They test timelines. They test consistency. They test everything. Witnesses who once stayed silent could be compelled to speak. Documents that once stayed private could be compelled to surface. Conversations long forgotten could be resurrected and examined with brutal precision. And precision leaves no room for reinvention. That's why experienced advisors often recommend signaling legal action but avoiding filing it, because signaling creates fear without triggering exposure. Filing removes that safety. Filing locks everything into procedure. Procedure strips away narrative control. Procedure hands power to judges, lawyers, and evidence. And evidence doesn't care about reputation. Evidence cares about truth. Meanwhile, Tom Bauer's calm persistence sent a message louder than any accusation. He wasn't retreating. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't backing down. He was waiting. Waiting because he understood leverage. Because leverage isn't about what you say, it's about what you can prove. And proving something in court changes everything forever. Because court doesn't just decide winners and losers. Court creates permanent records. Permanent records rewrite legacies. Permanent records outlive narratives. And that's why the most powerful battlefield in Meghan Markle's life wasn't Hollywood. It wasn't Buckingham Palace. It wasn't even the media. It was the courtroom she never entered. Because sometimes the most revealing decision isn't the fight you win, it's the fight you never start. And that unanswered question still lingers like smoke in the air. Was the silent strategy or survival?